Coming up, a conversation with Longinos Gonzalez Jr., candidate for Colorado Springs mayor.
This is 6035 Media.
Casting an informed vote is your right and your duty as a citizen. I'm Brian Grossman, executive editor at 6035.
And I'm Shelley Roars, spokesperson for the League of Women Voters at the Pikes Peak Region.
We're teaming up to bring you conversations with the candidates in the April 2023 Colorado Springs city election. So this interview is both an episode of the new 6035 Vote podcast
and the League's Making Democracy Work podcast. So let's get to it. Longinos, why don't you get us started and tell us a little bit about yourself for a couple of minutes?
Sure. So I'm Longinos Gonzalez. I like to tell a story about myself, a little bit about my background. I love to say that, hey, I've been living the American dream. My parents were farm laborers from Mexico, immigrated to the United States, settled in Central California where I was raised. My parents worked hard. They were farm laborers, and then later my father moved into machine operations, still manual labor. And he talked to me when I was young about the emphasis and prioritization of education and working hard. And so I tried to do that. He said, can you work real hard in school? Because, this manual labor, great work, honest work, but he thought I could do something with a strong education. And so I kept working hard in school. When it came time to looking at colleges, again, we didn't have a lot of money, so I had to go where the scholarships were. I worked real hard, and I thought I could get into the Air Force Academy, looked into that, and I was, blessed to have been able to be accepted into the Air Force Academy, where then I did 4 years there, came out as commissioned as a second lieutenant, and then served 20 years in the Air Force. A lot of highlights, a lot of moves, a couple of tours in the Middle East, a couple of tours in South America. I do like to tell a story about how when I was in Latin America and Colombia, there working at the embassy, the highlight of my military career was participating with our intelligence collection into a hostage rescue operation where the Colombian Special Forces successfully rescued 3 American hostages and 12 Colombian hostages that had been held captive over 5 years, and I think most of them over 7 years from the insurgents there. So it was wonderful to see those 3 Americans return to the United States. And then I retired out of San Antonio and then moved back here in 2012, and so I've been enjoying a return here. Wanted to give back to my community, and so I started teaching. I did my master's degree in teaching way back when, so I was a middle school teacher at Carmel Middle School. They're on the south side, where people know I'm always a big supporter of our southeast and our community there, and doing everything I can to help advance everybody in the city, but they're in the southeast, which sometimes needs that voice. And so I did that for a little bit, and then I ran, and I was elected to county commissioner 6 years ago, where I've been proudly serving our community for 6 years, and then decided to get into the mayor's race, middle of last year, and we'll see how it goes, but very proud of all the service I've done, community involvement here locally, and helping our community and being a voice for them.
Great, thank you. Thanks for your service.
Oh, thank you.
All right, I'm going to ask you some specific questions now.
Sure.
So City Council recently passed the 128% water rule regarding annexations. Wondering where you stand on that water rule and sort of how the city annexes currently.
Sure. Well, water is critical for our community here. We're always perennially dry, and need to make sure that we're doing smart moves, decisions on making sure we address the water issues here for long-term growth. And it's something I've been involved in. So when they first had their meeting, I believe it was the October Utilities Board meeting, I did attend and listen. I did speak for my I think it was 2 minutes or 3 minutes that you could speak, and I just asked that we do a regional discussion on this so that we can have strategic long-term plans on what to do about water and what to do about growth. The county and the city have partnered over on annexation discussions, and we do have an intergovernmental agreement, so an IGA between us. And one of the concerns I had when I first heard this was, what does that do to our IGA? Does it negatively affect it? Does it negatively affect housing costs? Because the potential is there if it's not done smartly. And then listening at the first meeting, I didn't get I didn't feel comfortable that they had identified the 130%. Now they voted on 128. It was amended and a first vote at 128. Where those numbers came from, and so I just honestly believe we need a little bit more dialogue before they do a final vote. And so I'm clearly supportive of anything that takes water into account and allows the city. And working with our community partners to identify what that long-term growth strategy should be. So I want to make sure we start those discussions immediately, and they should be starting now. I've actually asked that they begin now at the county and city level because I do represent the county, and let's get with our partners together. But right now, I think they should wait on a final vote until we have the discussions, so they're making a smart decision on long-term water use.
And how do you feel about these flagpole annexations specifically, where you bring in parts of the city and sort of try to connect it to the city?
Sure. I think those should be minimized because one of the things you want as we're trying to grow smartly. So how do we do that? Well, making sure that we have growth areas, annexation areas, if we're going to annex, where we already have critical service, essential services available, fire departments, police departments, the infrastructure, whether it's roads, water, or utilities connections. When you do a flag annexation, it makes it more difficult and more costly to do so. So they should be limited in scope if they're done, but we should be identifying areas for smart growth and putting those in our long-term plan and trying to annex smartly so that we're taking efficient use of our infrastructure and our essential services like police and fire, and that's going to help keep our costs low, keep housing costs from rising even more as we've seen the last several years. We got to do everything we can to make things efficient, and so I think annexations that are in better positions and strategically placed make more sense than a flagpole annexation.
Okay, thank you. Shelley?
Yes, sir. So I've kind of got a two-pronged question still about water, but you may have already answered the second part with regards to your annexation views right there. But with regards to water, we do waste a lot. Landscaping is one of the biggest uses of our water to make our grasses look green and our yards look pretty. Curb appeal. I am a realtor, so I totally understand that curb appeal. I also I do not understand planting Kentucky bluegrass in an area that it's not native either. So number one, how can we do better with regards to waste? And it's not just my individual neighbor either. It's big business, those big resorts and those golf courses that, need that. So that's kind of the first question and kind of keeping it short and sweet. But then also, should the city consider extending water and other utilities to subdivisions that are located outside that city, which is part of that annexation that might never be annexed, but being a regional water provider, is that something we should look at?
Sure. And so on the first part, that's a great question. And one of the things we did at the county level several years ago, as we saw some of these issues related to water and say the lush grass that you'd have in the front lawn or back lawn, we looked at the land use code, and a lot of times that's already dictated in minimum amounts of grass areas, and we said that doesn't make sense. We need to allow xeriscaping. We need to allow these things that allow us to be water smart and conserve our water. And so we changed our land code to make it easier for people to do xeriscaping and to save water, and to not make any mandates where we're going to force this excessive, one, costs, and two, water usage. And so we wanted to make sure we minimize that. We did change the code. If there's anything in the city that we can do to make those codes easier for people to do xeriscaping and other water efficiencies, let's do that, because we don't want to make sure, as we're growing, we need to make sure we're using our water effectively and saving as much as we can. Also on that, anything that we can do to incentive through the utilities for water conservation, we need to look into that. We need to make sure that people are taking not wasting our water resources and being incentivized to conserve as much water as possible. So I want to make sure that I work with the utilities. Again, the mayor is not a board member of the utilities, but ex officio, so that it does get to participate, ask questions, and bring up ideas. And so I want to be one of the voices and leaders in helping to make sure that we're being water smart as we grow as a community. The other aspect, again, a lot of the annexations that would take place as we're growing, those would be on a case-by-case basis, but I absolutely think we need to prioritize our infill of the city, utilize the areas that we see around our community. And they're all over the place. In the southeast, there's one area right now, Hancock Commons is coming in. I live right next to that. That's been open space, just a grass area, not a very conducive layout in terms of the size, but they're going to do some renovations that allow that into housing. So that makes sense. We have various areas around the community that we should be providing infill for our housing and commercial, and taking advantage of that. Again, if you can do that, you can make more effective use of our essential services, our critical services, where there are already fire departments close by, police stations close by, utility hookups right down the street. And that's how you're going to help keep costs down and maximize our growth and efficiencies. Now, again, as we are growing over time, and we're talking about decades worth of growth, we're going to have to annex at some point. And so we want to make sure that we're doing that smartly. And if we utilize regional partners, that we provide the waters where it makes smart. And then again, that's where our coming together in a regional dialogue with our community partners, city, county, and the water districts to make sure we're doing that in a smart way and annexing and growing smartly. But again, I really want to emphasize our infill. Use the land, use the services that we've got locally.
Thank you, Brian.
Here's a private property right question. How do you feel about accessory dwelling units being allowed in single-family residential areas?
Sure, and that's a great question because that kind of goes hand in hand with some of the infill and utilizing and growing in the city as our first priority before annexing. And again, those be annexed case-by-case basis. In this case, you want to look at them in a case-by-case basis as well. There's already land use codes in place to kind of provide guidance on how to do this. But that doesn't mean we can't change them or shouldn't change them. At the county, we were one of the first in the whole country to allow tiny homes in certain properties, as long as they met guidelines. And this makes sense in terms of like adding ADUs to certain communities and certain areas of the city. Now, there are definitely certain areas of the city I would probably think they're not going to be compatible in areas. There's some culturally and heritage areas that I think maybe we don't want to do that to. And so we want to make sure that any decisions are based upon, again, smart use of land, infill, but also having robust public input so that we're not doing anything that would not be smart for the city, wouldn't be smart for our community. Again, right now there's a lot of discussions on this east-west corridor, on expansions on roads through Constitution, through the middle of north side of Old North End kind of area. And there might be some communities that we would say, ADUs don't make sense in these communities, but we want to make sure that we do, again, as part of that strategic review of our growth, how we're going to do these smartly. And so I would be open to adding ADUs as one of our many ways of addressing our housing issue and rising costs, because we need to address that. But again, I do think it has to be limited and in certain areas where it makes sense.
Now, when you say cultural and heritage, do you mean historically protected?
Yes, exactly. There's
residential.
Yes,
right,
so there's clearly certain areas in the city you probably wouldn't want to
Just add something.
Add something. Right. So, because I've never really appreciated statewide or locally blanket approach to something.
Sure.
So say, ADUs are going to be approved in every area of the city,
Right.
or something that comes down from the state that says blanket approval of A or B or X and Y, that doesn't make sense. And so again, we want to make sure that these are done smartly, done in the right parts of the city, but we want to make sure we're making more efficient use of our land. And so I do think ADUs are one way to be able to address that.
Okay. And I think that sets up Shelley's next question, right?
It does. Kind of looks right into your plan, basically, to address our affordable housing attainability. As some call it a crisis, but is it really attainable? Whether it's rent for some, right, or even just owning a home.
Right, and I think we've already kind of asked two questions where I've kind of already brought that in, because this issue is so important. It is involved in every aspect that we're doing, probably in terms of when we talk about water, when we talk about growth, when we talk about public safety. This is going to be embedded in almost every talking point and an important priority that we how how do we address that? One of the things I appreciate in experience was that I did serve a couple of years in our county's liaison to the Housing Authority at the county level. And so I did get to see how some of our funds at the county level greatly helped address some of this at our local level. And some of those are the private activity bonds that allows construction projects for housing to utilize tax-free bonds. And this is going to save them, depending on the size, hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in construction costs over the duration of those bonds. And so those are the things we need to make sure that we're utilizing properly and efficiently. And then the thing I think hopefully we can do better is tying that together with other grants so that you're just maximizing and increasing the effectiveness for every dollar. It's not a one-on-one. Now it's a 1 to 2, 1 to 3, and being able to use that exponentially to increase our housing stock, which is going to help keep the costs down and hopefully bring costs down. And so that's one aspect. Other things, helping new homeowners or lower income homeowners. Again, at the county level, I saw how we were able to use that through a program we called Turnkey. And that would allow these lower income or first time homeowners to get reduced down payments. And then that fund replenishes over time as they start paying back those some of that turnkey. And some of those are forgivable. And so we want to try to find all of these different methods of being able to, one, bring down costs and get those potential homeowners into a new home, because clearly we see that those people that have been able to invest and have that home, have that equity that comes together. That's how a lot of these people become that middle income family down the road, or a single individual, because of the equity that they get from getting into that first home. So if we can make things easier and doing it in a way that's smart and expands the housing stock, keeps the costs down, this is something we need to do. And so there's just a couple of ideas, but anything we can do to work with our nonprofits as well, again, any other funding programs statewide or nationally at the federal level that helps us increase that housing stock and helps a family or an individual person getting into a home, we need to try to do that.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Longinos, you touched on growth, which is obviously a big deal, and utilizing public services that already exist would be ideal rather than having to expand those because of annexations and such. But the police force, even with the population that we have now, is already strained. We have figures anywhere from 50 to 70 officers below authorized strength. What do you do about that, considering the population that we have now that's already short on what appears, police officers, and as we continue to grow, how do you address that?
Sure, and again, on the housing part, when you do infill, that allows you to utilize the already existing services.
Right.
It's probably going to still increase manning, but it'll keep you from having to build
new
stations, as we grow potentially, or helps us save costs there long term to address the big issue of how do we retain, how to recruit good officers to our force and then keep them. And so what I want to do is I'll make sure we do things like some of the basics, compensation studies to see how, is this something that's keeping them from joining or having them leave the force? Are they going somewhere else? Is there some sort of morale issue that would not necessarily bring them in, but they would be then leaving us for some reason? How do we look into that? But a lot of times it's salary, a lot of times it's benefits, and so we're going to have to look at that so that we can make sure that we are retaining what we have and then bringing in sufficient numbers to get us to that number. And I believe it's like a 60 or 70 short. We did, I think, believe at the county level just get up to our authorized strength, but that took some time as well, similar to the cities. And so I want to make sure we address that. If it takes additional dollars, funding to get them on par, then we'll look at that, and we may have to do that. And I'd be supportive of that if that's what the information and the data says is the issue. If it's other things, benefits, well, then let's look at the benefits. If it's morale, let's look at what might be causing that morale issue. And I do know over the last several years, nationwide and statewide, not just locally, this is happening across the country. We have seen in our law enforcement and first responders a little bit of reluctance to stay in the service in the career field or to enter the career field. And so one of the things I would like to do, and I've been doing it already, is do these town halls and forums, or bring in our community leaders, those and our law enforcement and our first responders together to talk about issues that are going on in our community, that's going on nationwide, and see if there's any issues that could be, whether again it's funding or morale, that helps improve those conditions, so that we have a city, our community, and our workers, or our police and fire, who are proud of the service they provide of the jobs that they do, and proud of the city they live in, and want to continue to live here and work. And so we're going to address those as best possible, and I'm open to public input on how to do that. I want to look at some of the data again on salaries. And I think one of the other things that we need to address specifically is the previous police chief had mentioned and acknowledged that we did have some slow call response times and some drop call issues. And so I want to make sure that we're addressing those issues so that our public feel like they're getting the best service possible, because clearly number one job in government is really providing for public safety. Our residents deserve to feel and to know that they are safe in their homes, in their communities and neighborhoods. And so I want to make sure that as mayor, we address those issues and we correct any of those issues right now with, again, manning, training, and retention.
Okay, thank you. Shelley?
How are we doing on time?
We're getting there, so
You want
go
me to
ahead.
do the
If
last
you want to
two?
ask, yeah, go ahead and do
Okay.
that, and we'll see where we are. I might have one more.
Yes, sir. So a couple things. What are your thoughts? And these are should be kind of brief, but what are your thoughts on moving spring municipal elections to the fall to help increase voter turnout, overall voter turnout, because we know usually it's pretty low in this type of year, and then it can also possibly save the city up to $600,000 per election time. What are your thoughts there?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
No, absolutely. This is one of the things that, again, I've always supported what makes sense. How do you save money? How do you do things more efficiently? And I think this is one of those smart things that can and should be done. If you put it with the regular elections in the November timeframe, you're going to save the cost on having to do this all on your own, and doing the ballots and the elections and the counting and everything on your own. That's going to save money. That makes a lot of sense. The voter turnout, we already see how low of a voter turnout we see in the municipal elections compared to the general elections in November. So this is going to help increase our turnout. And that's valuable because people's voices need to be heard. And in different parts of the city, you already see limited voting. The southeast where I live, at the city council district races, that vote is usually one half of any of the other districts that are voting. And so how do we improve those voices? How do we improve the opportunity for them to be heard and have their issues addressed? And I think that's by doing everything we can to improve the voter turnout, and by putting it on November, that makes sense. I'd be supportive of that.
Thank you, sir. And kind of a second follow-up is, this is a strong mayor kind of community in the instance of running for mayor, right? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on raising city council pay to a reasonable amount to be inclusive of those who don't have the ability to do this job as their only job, like some of our retiree candidates?
Sure, and I appreciate that. And I think that's a smart thing too. As we've seen a lot, and I appreciate, I'm a veteran. I'm a retired Air Force officer, served my country, and I would be able to do something at the city council level or the mayor's if I wanted to, just on a volunteer basis, because I have a pension, and then as a businessman I have rental properties, so I have other sources of income that would allow me to take that job, but it limits the pool when it's $6,200, I believe, annually. Annually.
6,250.
Annually.
Yeah.
So it limits the pool of people that can run, and we've got quality people in this great city and community that could run and be effective leaders, but many of them can't do it because of the salary. So I would look at that as well, and I would encourage something that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you very much.
We do have time, so I'm going to ask you one more thing.
Sure.
Do you foresee asking voters for any sort of tax increases if you're elected mayor?
I do not.
Taxes or fees?
Sure, I do not. Honestly, the last several years, I think we can do some things more efficiently and effectively, and that's what I'd like to do. I think I've done that at the county level, looked at the budgets to do things effective and efficiently, and I think we can find some things to put additional dollars to public safety, roads, parks, which are woefully underfunded. I think we can improve there without tax increases. And why do I say that? Well, the budget from 2019 to 2023 has increased 36%. So increases are there. With the ARPA funds and the CARES Act funds, that was about $100 million that the city received over the last several years. So I don't think we need these tax increases, and I'm very reluctant to add additional tax burden to our residents as we came out of COVID, where so many people were laid off, where inflation has been hitting them hard, and where lots of our families locally have been struggling to put that food on the table coming out of COVID, and with inflation hitting hard, I think we can do things without a tax increase, and I think with the budget increases that I've just stated, the 36% and the ARPA funds. Being properly used, I think we can be effective and efficient without any tax increases.
And you mentioned parks. Maybe you could expand on that a little, because parks are a huge topic here in the city.
Sure.
Both for developers who don't necessarily want to, allot as much space as maybe the citizens want, and then as the government, you sort of have to be an intermediary. How would you address the park situation?
Sure, and I tell this story a lot. I moved back here, I went to school here, college here, but I love this area because of the outdoors and the parks, the open space, the Garden of the Gods, Pikes Peak. I mean, this is a beautiful area, and this is why people want to come back and stay here and live, and that's what I greatly appreciated. So I want to do more for our parks. And again, I think that with the increase in the budget, one of the things that happened in 2021 was the Tabor retention request that saved some money. Some of that money went to the wildland mitigation.
Right.
But that also allowed for a retention of dollars going forward after that. And I think there's funds there that can be utilized to improve our parks. And so I'm committed to improving our parks and getting additional dollars there through our general fund.
Okay. Longinos, would you take just a couple minutes to wrap up and remind voters why they should vote for you?
Sure. I think I've got that broad background that separates me a little bit. Being a military veteran, I was a school teacher before. I was also a college professor before as part of the military, but I got the experience there. I'm a businessman, and just that background that I bring allows me, I think, that experience and understanding to be able to represent a diverse community that includes so many veterans. Right? When was the last time we had a veteran that was a mayor that can be their voice? They can be the voice of so many people, and so that's one of the reasons. And then I think I want to really prioritize what I think the residents prioritize: our public safety, our roads and infrastructure, transparency, and making sure that we take care of our parks and make good, sound decisions on growing our community smartly and addressing those water issues. So I think I've got the broad background that really fits our community, and that I can be that great, that honest and strong voice for our community, because I think I've been doing that for the last 6 years for our community, and I think they've seen it. And I just ask for people's support for Longinos Gonzalez for mayor.
All right. Thank you, Longinos. We appreciate your time. You've been watching or listening to a joint podcast effort by Sixty35 Media and the League of Women Voters of the Pikes Peak Region.
Be sure to follow Making Democracy Work and check out lwvppr.org for more information regarding our candidate forums in March.
And stick with us at Sixty35 Vote to make sure your vote is an informed one. This podcast is produced by Dave Gardner, video directed by Nick Raven. I'm Brian Grossman, executive editor.
And I'm Shelley Rohrs, spokesperson of the League of Women Voters. See you next time.
Hi, I'm Dave Gardner.
And I'm Nick Raven.
We're the podcast producers here at Sixty35 Media.
Sixty35 Vote is just one of a growing family of hyperlocal podcasts that we're creating.
And these are for you, someone who wants to engage fully in your community.
We've got the 6035, which is a quick, lively recap of the top news stories of the week.
It's my favorite. It's really great and often funny.
I love having you as a guest, actually.
I do too.
And then we have Hot Takes and Streaming Breaks, which is a potpourri of news and commentary about movies, gaming, TV, streaming, and just so much more. It's for the youthful at heart, and that could be anyone, really.
Yeah, I'm surprised I even really enjoy it because Nick hosts that, and he's witty.
Well, and the cool thing is that you can watch both of these podcasts on YouTube.
Or you can listen to them on the go in your favorite podcast app.
And there's a couple more, but you can also visit 6035media.org/podcast to see them, browse them, sample them.
And then subscribe to the ones that you like.
And then subscribe to this YouTube channel.
Yeah. And if you really love it all, like we do, you can just subscribe to the 6035 Podcast Network podcast, which is a conglomeration of all the episodes, all the brilliance and humor that emanates from the studio.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of it. So like and subscribe today and go listen to them all or watch them.
What he said. Good. Thanks.
Got it?
That wasn't so painful.